Good evening and welcome to the Ogden City Council meeting of February 14th, 2017. This is our City Council meeting, and please note that all council members are present. With that, I'll turn the time over to Vice Chair Heyer to do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please rise and recite the Pledge of Allegiance with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is to take a moment of silence. Please take a moment of silence with me. Thank you. Next on our agenda is the approval of minutes. First is the special meeting of October 11th, 2016, and the regular meeting of October 25th, 2016. Councilmember Blair.
Yes, I have reviewed those minutes and found them to be accurate.
The joint work session of October 11th, 2016. Vice Chair Heyer.
Yes, I've reviewed them, and they appear to be correct.
The joint work session of November 8th, 2016. Councilmember Lopez.
Chair White, I reviewed the minutes, found them to be correct.
The joint work session of November 15th, 2016. Councilmember Nadolski.
Thank you, Chair White. I've reviewed them and found them to be correct.
The regular meeting of November 15th, 2016. Councilmember Garner.
Yes, Chair White, I reviewed those minutes and found them to be correct.
And last, the closed session of November 15th, 2016. Councilmember Stevens.
Yes, Chair, they're correct, and I make a motion that we adopt the minutes that have been presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Stevens, second by Councilmember Blair. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those go into record. Next on our agenda is a common consent item. It is the Weber Morgan Board of Health.
Chair White, I would make a motion that we approve the common consent agenda by making appointment to Neil Garner to the Weber Morgan Sewer Board, or Morgan Board of Health, sorry. Sewer Board on the mind.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chair Heyer, second by Councilmember Nadolski to considerate. It's not a good word.
It's not good.
We're going to put Neil on the Weber Morgan Board of Health. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. Thank you, Neil, for doing that. Next on our agenda, reports from the Planning Commission. We have two items.
Mr. Montgomery's show tonight.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the council, what you're considering tonight is a petition that had been filed to the city to look at rezoning property on 7th Street, about 350 East 7th Street. And the Planning Commission reviewed this in their regular meeting. What the petitioner is asking is to rezone 1.29 acres of property, and you see it's outlined in that red area. Part of his property is zoned commercial and part of it is zoned R16. But you see the majority of the property is kind of an inner block parcel with only a frontage of 60 feet wide that extends out to 7th Street. R3 zoning is to the north, and there's some R3 zoning that's to the south. And so his request to look at R3 zoning is consistent with how development patterns have happened in that area. The problem with the property, and when you look at some of their general policies, is the property is split by different zones. The commercial zoning that it has really can't be developed because it's so isolated. It doesn't have any frontage really on any traffic street that would generate a decent commercial use. And you have only one home that could be built on this 1.29 acres because it's one lot. And so rezoning it would allow additional properties, additional development to take place. The planning staff, as they looked at this petition, recommended the commission, and the commission's forwarded that recommendation on to you, to include some additional properties to add to that. And there are 3 properties that add a half an acre to the rezoning. And what they do is they fill in that gap between the Maverick and the R3 that's to the west, and also squares off the property to the west of the existing R3 along 7th Street. So we don't have isolated areas of different zones, but so that all can have the same zoning. Now, that doesn't mean that the single-family homes there have to change. Single-family homes are allowed in the R3 zones. But it will keep the property so there's no nonconformities and allow consistent development. And this is consistent with the general plan of that area, the Lynn Community Plan, of having edges that are defined by different zones, correcting parcels that were split by the zones, and acting as a transition between that commercial, which is on Washington, to the properties and the single-family homes that get to Grant Avenue. The Planning Commission recommended on an 8-0 vote to recommend this approval, including those 3 parcels. The staff also recommended to square off this entire area that's being considered for rezoning.
Is this more of a cleanup procedure more so than?
Well, it's a petitioned item, so the petitioner has a specific item he wants to look at, and so we took advantage of that to then help clean up some items.
What can be built on this?
So he could develop a group dwelling project, which would be multiple units, multiple buildings. The project was developed to the north a few years ago by the Ogden Housing Authority, and so multiple units could be developed on that property, being zoned R3. You really can't split it up and subdivide it into lots. It just doesn't have that frontage on the street. So really, kind of a group dwelling project is the most reasonable development pattern that could take place there.
So the developer would present his plans to the Planning Commission.
Correct.
Then?
Correct.
What will they do on that section that's the westernmost part that does touch 7th Street? Is that how's that going to face the street?
It really won't make a change there. There's a house there now, so the house can still stay. Houses are permitted, single-family homes are permitted in the R3. Mm-hmm. But it just gets the zoning, so there's not this checkerboard approach.
So that's not going to be part of their thing. It's just a zoning cleanup.
It's just a zoning cleanup.
Fabulous. Okay. Their ingress egress will go on that eastern part.
Right next to Maverick.
Okay. Great. Okay.
Any other questions? All right. So, is the petitioner here, Mr. Davies? No? Okay. All right. This is we have public input.
I don't see any public input, and so I will make a motion that we adopt ordinance 2017-2.
I second it.
We have a motion by Vice Chair Heyer, second by Councilmember Stevens, to adopt proposed ordinance 2017-2. This is a roll call vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Garner?
Aye.
Councilmember Lopez?
Aye.
Councilmember Nadolski?
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Vice Chair Heyer?
Aye.
Chair White?
Aye. That passes. Next on the agenda is another report from the Planning Commission. Mr. Montgomery.
Okay. Madam Chair and members of the council, this is a staff-generated consideration of amending a provision we have in our ordinance. Originally, it's called the Boxlike Structure Ordinance. It's commercial-style buildings in a residential zone, has many different names. But what it does, it allows reuse of buildings that have traditionally been built in the central or other older areas of the city. They were designed for commercial activities. They may have been the grocery store or some type of small little shop built when a lot of mixture uses took place in the central area. But because they're all zoned residential, they had difficulty in being reused because they'd sit vacant for many years. And so this provision, this 1563, is a way to reuse these buildings. And so when that ordinance was developed, it took a look at those types of buildings and looked at how do we keep those buildings active and reused regardless of the zoning that's there. What were they built for? Let's have them be used for what they were built for. Also throughout that time period when this ordinance was first adopted, R4 and R5 zones allowed offices. That isn't allowed anymore. And so this also takes a look at those buildings that were built in the 60s and 70s that are professional offices that are zoned residential. Again, they were built for commercial style use, and so it allows reuse of those buildings also. The reason behind that ordinance, as I explained, is to create an incentive to reuse these buildings that are pocketed throughout. There's 45 of them in the city, and presently 80 of them are vacant. So they've been able to be reused. But this makes sure they can continue to be reused. As we looked at the revisions and updates of this, one of the things we were concerned about is making sure the land uses still fit. Again, when this was created in the mid-'80s, different terminology, different thoughts and ideas existed of what could take place in that. As we've looked at rezonings and other things, some of those ideas have changed. And so one of the things we want to make sure is the approval process was all based on conditional uses. Well, state law changed what conditional uses are. So the criteria that was originally adopted with this ordinance no longer is really effective. You can't pick and choose where something can happen. All you have to look at now is, do you mitigate the impact of whatever it is? You can't deny it at certain locations. So the ordinance looks at changing that philosophy. It looks also changing that this is a last resort method. This is something that really ought to be able to be utilized no matter what the situation is. Those buildings that exist, we want them to be reused. And then we want to set certain standards of process to make it a simpler process to go through, that it's not always going to the Planning Commission, but it can be done as a staff review by setting certain standards. So we remove some uses that are more auto-oriented because of the nature of the neighborhoods, taking out banks, dry cleaning, convenience stores. Convenience stores are defined as gas and product sale, food and product sale. And so those really aren't, a lot of those buildings just can't do that anyway. There are a couple that are still out there, but the majority of them, could never be made that way. Also, we had all these little lists of uses, peanut shop, and just lumped them all together into just one general food category. And then some of the old terms, film exchange, that doesn't happen a lot anymore, or novelty store. What is a novelty store? Just changing some of those older words to what is more common usage now. And then we added into this vacation rentals as a new use. Again, looking at these types of things of how can we reuse these buildings, this be an opportunity to be one, because it was a commercial in nature building. Why not allow this type of use to take place there? Again, as I mentioned, revise the approval process, removing it as a conditional use and having it approved by staff, and then if there's modifications taking place on the site, let the Planning Commission review it, but they're reviewing it based on design standards, not as a conditional use process. Those general standards are you kind of keep the same bulk and design of the building. So again, it's preserved. You don't allow drive-up windows or pick-up windows because, again, you want interaction of people in neighborhoods. Limit the building materials to kind of what historically was there. Maintain the property, set hours of operation, which was what conditional use tried to do. Look at signage and control it so it doesn't disrupt neighborhoods. Not have electronic message boards next to homes because these uses are all surrounded by homes. And so kind of control that. And also make sure the windows are transparent so people can see in what's going on, what's taking place on the commercial type of activities. The Planning Commission discussed adding also another use, and that's single-family homes. The way the present ordinance reads is that if a building was not built for that use, it couldn't be reused that way. So if these buildings were commercial, then a single-family home couldn't go into it. Well, if it's a a residential neighborhood, why not allow a single-family home into it, even into these buildings? Because someone may like that idea of this kind of mercantile design of their home, a warehouse loft type approach. And so why not allow that as a use into these structures? Also, in their philosophical discussion of what zoning does, they looked at it to do a holistic approach of all these buildings, rather than isolate this building here or this building here of what it can be, but let that take into account all 45 of the buildings that exist, and recognizing in the commercial nature of vacation rentals that they would be appropriate in these buildings. There was a discussion with the commission about non-owner occupancy and the separation requirements, because if you recall in our vacation rental, if it's non-owner occupied in the multifamily zone, there is a one per block requirement or limit. And the commission felt that that still should be in place even for these types of buildings. There's only a couple areas where that would occur of these types of buildings where there's 2 on a block. And again, most of them have other uses, but their recommendation to you is to have that provision still in place, that whatever is fair in the R2 zone is fair for every type of building in the R2 zone, and not to give a special preference to these types of uses, but let them have the same standards. So the Planning Commission's recommendation to you on their 8-0 vote, and we did note on that took a while to get to the 8-0 vote, is to approve this language change, adding single-family homes and vacation rentals as new uses and making the other cleanups that I mentioned.
There was a lot of talk, if I remember right, about dual use. I mean, so that there would be a commercial use in the front end and the vacation rental use in the back end.
There were 2 or 3 buildings that were built that way. They had the storefront and then a house on the back. And those will still all fit in that category of that box-like building. So that could be options of multi-uses.
I like the idea of reusing these older buildings because that's part of our history that we have in those neighborhoods. But can you address the dumpster or the garbage and delivery concept in here? How did they look at that?
Generally, these would be treated as any other property in the residential zone, that deliveries would occur street side, just like the UPS coming or something else. There's really not, most of these properties, the way they're designed, they just don't have a lot of extra space. They take most of the site. And so everything kind of happens at the curb. And if they do want to put a dumpster in and have it picked up some other way, they'd have to design that, screen it, and meet the general standards we have for those types of uses.
So they would review that with your staff? And
correct.
Okay.
If I heard you right, you're saying that they have to follow the same, if they want to do a vacation rental or something like that, they'd still have to follow the same outline or the same issues, or I guess,
right,
of the ordinance we just
the
passed.
same standards. The one difference is if they're in the single-family zone, again, these aren't owner-occupied,
right,
and so they don't have to follow that criteria. So they still would be allowed in single-family zones, but they're not owner-occupied because they fit in this different category.
But they'd still have to have the same
buildings.
off-street parking and all of the other things.
Well, actually, in this, we waived the off-street parking because we realized most of these don't have parking. And they functioned in the past as a commercial activity without parking. Having the residential aspect of it shouldn't create any additional impact on what they had in the past.
Didn't you say there was 11 of them in the single-family zone?
I think I'm trying to remember the number.
I'm trying to remember. That's what comes to my mind, but
it seems,
that seems too low.
It seems like 21.
Yeah,
I think there's 21.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
About half of them.
Yeah, but that there was only 3 that were in a one block zone from each other.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Good work on that one, and fast work. Thank you. All right, this is an opportunity to accept public input regarding this issue.
Now, I got to say, in as much as there's nobody moving for the public input, the Planning Commission worked really hard to come to a compromise that they actually did get an 8-0 vote on, and it was kind of impressive to watch them negotiate and to discuss these the small nuances of this thing, and so they deserve our salute for good work. And I guess with that, I'll make a motion that we adopt proposed ordinance 2017-3.
Second.
I have a motion by Vice Chair Heyer, second by Councilmember Blair to adopt proposed ordinance 2017-3. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Garner,
Aye.
Councilmember Lopez,
Aye.
Councilmember Nadolski,
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens,
Aye.
Councilmember Blair,
Aye.
Vice Chair Heyer,
Aye.
Chair White.
Aye. That passes, and I think there will be some opportunities for people who were concerned on our first go around. So that will be a welcome salute. Next on our agenda is public comments. This is an opportunity to address the council regarding any concerns or ideas. If you want to come up, please state your name, and you have 3 minutes to do any public input. No? All right. Comments from the mayor.
Happy Valentine's Day. Thanks. Not quite. Sorry.
Council members, any comments from you guys?
Just again to second what Councilmember Heyer said, just kudos for the Planning Commission and their City Council staff and everyone, planning staff, for working so effectively and quickly on this proposal for the citizens. Thank you.
I've had several residents ask if they have any flooding or water problems. How do they address that aspect of it from the city?
I'm sorry, wasn't listening.
I had several residents ask if they have any water problems or flooding. How do they address that, or who do they call in the city to get questions answered?
They certainly can call our office, and we would be happy to direct them to the right place. We're evaluating currently how we handle sandbagging and et cetera. We're actually really evaluating also what our needs are going to be. We spent some time talking this morning with Tage Flint, and his outlook kind of scared us a little. So that's something I think we're spending a little bit of time on the next little while.
Other comments? I just want to make a comment because I didn't get to do this last week, but the CVB put on a Yeti Bash, which we had a great turnout at the Yeti Bash on Friday night. There were a lot of people down here, a lot of people wandering the streets and participating, and so it was just a nice event for the winter months as well. So.
I just actually want to take a quick opportunity. I want to thank Amy, Sue, and Brittany for all the work they do for us and for their incredibly outstanding customer service and dedication to helping us be successful. Every time I had a need to call you and ask you for any favors, you've always gone above and beyond to help me, and so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other comments? Ditto. Yeah. With that, we will be moving into a closed executive session, and just want you to know that we will be moving from this room into the work session room, and so I need a motion.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn into a closed executive session.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Garner, second by Vice Chair Heyer, to move into the closed executive session. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Lopez,
Aye.
Councilmember
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens,
Aye.
Councilmember Blair,
Aye.
Councilmember Garner,
Aye.
Vice Chair Heyer,
Aye.
Chair White.
Aye. We will move in there and we will adjourn from that room.